This is the sermon for March 26th, 2023. I'm going to read from John 11, and I've called this The Wrapped Cadaver Came Out because the story is meant to be shocking, and we shouldn't make it nice. And if we do, we miss some of the power of it. So John 11, 1 through 44. And I've just dropped out some of the details that are important, but not for the main idea of the story. So follow the story as I go. Lazarus was sick. Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus, Master, the one you love so very much is sick. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. But oddly, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed on where he was for 2 more days. After some time, Jesus said, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up. The disciples said, Master, if he's gone to sleep, he'll get a good rest and wake up feeling fine. Jesus was talking about death, while the disciples thought Jesus was talking about taking a nap. Then Jesus stated, Lazarus died. Let's go to him. When Jesus finally got there, he found Lazarus already 4 days dead. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Mary remained in the house. Martha said, Master, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask, God will give you. Jesus said, Your brother will be raised up. Martha replied, Oh, I know that he will be raised up at the end of time. You don't have to wait for the end. Jesus said, I am resurrection and life. Those who believe in me in spite of death will live. Martha went to get Mary, who jumped up and ran out to Jesus. Mary came to where Jesus was waiting and said, Master, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her sobbing, he said, Where did you put him? She said, Master, come and see. Now Jesus wept. Others said, Well, if Jesus loved him so much, why didn't he do something to keep him from dying? After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man. Then Jesus arrived at the tomb. It was a simple cave in the hillside with a slab of stone laid against it. Jesus said, Remove the stone. Martha said, Master, by this time there's a stench. He's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to the others, Go ahead, take away the stone. They removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and prayed. Then he shouted, Lazarus, come out. And he came out, a cadaver, wrapped from head to toe, and with a kerchief over his face. Jesus told them, Unwrap him and let him loose. Even edited, there are so many twists and turns in this tale. So Jesus has the opportunity to go and heal, and he doesn't go. He pauses. You know, that reminds me that in our world, we highly value being busy, being productive, getting a lot done, racing, running just to stay in place. We're all on hamster wheels. We just run and run and run. Got to do more, get more, be more. There's just this constant push. And there was certainly a push for Jesus to go and heal Lazarus. That was there. And instead, Jesus stayed on where he was 2 more days. And then, oddly, he tells the disciples, Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up. What? The disciples say, no problem. He's taking a nap. He'll be fine. And Jesus says, no, he's dead. How odd. That, again, is a bit of a tennis match with the ball going back and forth, which happens throughout the whole story. So then Martha is the first to run out and say, if only you'd been here. And Martha gives him a vote of confidence. I still know that you are of God, and whatever you ask is powerful. And she didn't mean you can raise him up. That didn't occur to her. And Jesus says, your brother will be raised up. And Martha says, yes, I know, at the end of time, when all the dead in Christ, well, and she wouldn't have said Christ, all the dead that belong to God will be raised up. You don't have to wait for the end, Jesus says. I am resurrection and life. Just picture Jesus saying, in the face of death, I am resurrection and life. And then Jesus says, in spite of death, you live. What? This kind of blows our categories apart. We have death. Death is final. And it means death. And Jesus says, but I'm disrupting things. I'm resurrection and life. And so then Mary gets up and says, if only you had been here. We don't hear it once but twice. And then she's sobbing and Jesus is sobbing. I think everybody at that point is sobbing at the finality of the death. And again, if only you had been here. Well, then Jesus is going to go to the tomb. And you're meant to hear the pre-echo of the resurrection. Because remember, John is writing way after the resurrection of Jesus, even after there are Christian churches. I mean, they're meeting in homes and caves and places like that. But there were already gatherings of people following the risen Christ. And John is writing from that perspective. So you are meant to hear the similarities and the differences between Lazarus and Jesus. And again, there's a bit of a tennis match. And it's so interesting. The crowd says, if Jesus loved him so much, third time, why didn't Jesus come and heal? After all, he opened the eyes of a man blind from birth. He did the impossible. Everyone wants whatever it is that they want now. They want things to be maintained. They want things to be healed. They don't want to go to death. So 3 times we've had this longing. We don't want death. It's way too final. And so then to make sure you get the death, there's no, he was sleeping in the tomb. None of that. 4 days dead. 4 days dead. Now again, that's not 3 days dead. That's 4 days dead. More dead than Jesus was dead. Although they both were completely dead. Anyway, Martha is so practical. She says, Master, by this time there will be a stench. And when you look at old paintings, a lot of them have faces like, ugh, and they have their noses covered sometimes. The paintings want to show how bad it stunk when you can't smell it. It's so final. So they remove the stone. Jesus prays, again, similar to communion. Jesus prays. He lifts up the cup, he prays, he gives thanks, he talks to God, and then he says, take and eat. This is my body given for you. In the same way, Jesus raises his eyes and just prays. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. Here comes the power of life breaking into death and stealing from death, stealing the cadaver and making new life, not just an animated cadaver. No, this is something brand new. This is life that comes out of utter and complete finality. You're meant to get that. He came out. How? We have no idea. And paintings cannot convey this. He comes out a cadaver wrapped from head to toe with a kerchief. And with a kerchief over his face. He can't see his way out. It is so final. It is so utterly and completely final. And then Jesus says, unwrap him and let him loose. That's the call for Christians. Unwrap us and let us loose. We've moved through death. We moved into death, the finality of death. And now we can be unwrapped and let loose. Let loose on the world for what? To love. To bring life where there's death. Not just healing, not just like Doctors Without Borders, not that kind of, that's great. That's good. It's all good. But to bring life life is breaking into situations and we don't oomph it up. God brings it about. Resurrection and life brings it about. So you watch the tennis match between sleeping, death, waking up from a nap, resurrection and life. What a contrast. And then the crying out, not once, but really you have it all three times, because you have Martha first, then Mary, and then the crowd or the people bystanding. They say, if he loved him so much, why didn't he come and heal him? After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man. So you have three times. Why didn't Jesus just make it better? We long for things just to be made better. We just want little incremental better. And Jesus comes in the power of God, and says, life out of death. That's why we can take courage as we're invited into death. We're invited into the death of Jesus. Unmistakable. Good Friday is good because we can enter into death trusting that God will bring about life. We don't know what it will look like. We really don't. But there are times in our life today. So I never want to know about, tell us more about long ago and far away. I want to know exactly what happened. If there was a New York Times reporter, could they have reported on it? What would they have seen? What would they have written? I don't want to know that. What I want to know is today. How do we move into death? Accept the finality of it. It's not just a nap. Death is final. There's weeping, there's longing, there's confusion, there's grief. Death is horrible. And then somehow God brings life. So in our lives, here and now today. So one thing I know is that people go through terrible trauma. Individuals go through horrific trauma daily. And somehow there's healing in the way that brings about life. It looks final. You know, we see it when there's war. We see it when there's illness and death. Somehow, even going into death, releasing into death, like I saw in hospice, there's a freedom for life to come, even in the midst of that. There's longing, there's grief, there's confusion, there's intense emotions. And then Jesus talks about resurrection life. This is not a title of Jesus. This is mystery and power present for life. God breaks into our death here and now and brings about life. Life in a way that we haven't even fully seen. And yet we can be open to the mystery, right? We can be open to the mystery and the wonder. Where is life? Remember in John 9 with the man born blind, they're asking questions, and Jesus says, it's not about blame. It's not about cause and effect. Look for what God might do. We do the same thing. In the midst of death, we are in life. Look for what God might do. The words of funerals are important. All of the ritual involved in funerals, whatever it is, whatever, even if it's the simplest possible, it's important because life, true life, can only come out of death. When we're clinging and holding on for dear life, that's the expression, holding on for dear life. Of course we do that. We want hope. But you know, the world is full of busyness. What if busyness isn't the answer? What if greater and greater racing and productivity is not the answer? What if slowing down? What if stopping? What if being present with one another is truly the answer? What if? Let's look for what God might do in the midst of the finality and the confusion and the intense emotion of death. What might God do to bring about life? When we see people being present and loving in difficult circumstances, It looks hopeless. And yet there's life and there's power and there's mystery and there's wonder. We look for the wonder. God shows up in the midst of death, gives us life and vitality beyond what we can expect. There's a stench from death. That's how bad it is. It's okay to acknowledge how bad it is. And then there's love in action and there's life. Instead of being more busy and more productive, that's important. Of course it's important. But let's find the places of life and vitality. Let's learn what it is like to start to care more about others, what they're going through, empathy, true presence with one another. There's life in that. Power of life. Amen.